Tabby is definitely worth saving.
Don't you think it's time for the city of Savannah to have an honest tourism management plan? Let Scab start paying its fair share? And the hospitality industry needs to increase its wages? The impacts of new growth should not cost residents. All local elected officials on council and commission should have term limits. We're working hard to accomplish these policies. We need your help. Please contribute whatever you can, $5, $10, or $20, by going to bettersavannah.org. Donate. Thank you.
In my opinion, Tabby hasn't managed growth very well. We still have a chance at bringing back our community. Tabby is definitely worth saving.
The following show and broadcast is a production of Better Savannah, an independent expenditure committee dedicated to better policy outcomes at the state and local level. The views, opinions, and statements made by the hosts and/or their guests do not necessarily reflect the views of Better Savannah.
John, what's up, buddy?
Chuck, hello, good afternoon.
Oh, it's a special episode here. Still not sure what number this will be, but for our members and patrons that'll see this afternoon, it's Saturday, September 25th. This is the third of 5 interviews for the special election being held on November 2nd for House District 165. If this is your first time finding us, this is the Better Savannah podcast, a production of the Better Savannah Independent Committee, a unique, one-of-a-kind, best of its kind, independent political action committee here in the Savannah, Chatham County, coastal Georgia area, with a focus on better policy at the state and local level. We're excited today to have on Clinton Cowart. He is one of 5 qualified candidates for the special election on November 2nd. He's the candidate qualified as under the Libertarian Party. I believe one of the first candidates in a while to qualify in Chatham County under the Libertarian banners. We want to welcome to the show Clinton Cowart. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Well, why don't you just tell us, we're just getting to know you, but tell our viewers and our listeners who will see this next week a little bit about yourself, your background, and what led you to run for this open seat.
I'm a Savannah native. I pretty much grew up in and out of hospitals for the first few years of my life. I came home, and it pretty much took the whole community of government and private security, friends and family, that pretty much helped me evolve from the dire state that I was in back then. I watched Savannah there for a lot of changes, and like most people, some were good and a lot were bad, in my opinion. I went off to school, and when I returned to Savannah, I was appalled at some of the changes that I noticed and heard. What I noticed is that a lot of native Savannahians, the unemployment rate had increased, the homeless rate had increased. A lot of the people that have been born and raised here in Savannah were unable to attain the most minute employment positions, especially downtown. It's like they were being pushed out of the market. I noticed real estate values skyrocket downtown to where no one, in my opinion, that lives off of a meager income or even middle class income can even afford to live close to sometimes Midtown. And like most of you, I sat on the sidelines complaining, but I finally decided, you know what? Maybe it's time I try to actually do something about it. And here I am.
Right on.
Right on. Well, John, why don't you start off with the overarching question we've been starting, kind of everybody with about the kind of the premise of our entire organization with the 30 years of prosperity.
Yeah. And I think Clinton has kind of already set this up nicely for.
I thought so as well.
Introduction. Clinton, in the last 2 decades, we have seen unprecedented growth and prosperity, which you referenced in your opening comment. Tourism has gone from 1 million tourists a year to 8 million tourists. The port has seen container traffic, which is the principal function of the port, go from under 1 million TEU containers to 4 million, and now the port is poised to expand and double its size. The Savannah College of Art and Design 20 years ago probably had, and I don't know if this is the exact number, but they probably had 2,000 or 3,000 students. Today they have over 11,000. So with all these sectors experiencing this incredible growth and development and prosperity, Savannah's poverty rate today is 27, 28%. Depends on who you ask. But the point, Clinton, going back 2 decades, it was basically the same. So the question to you is, how do you explain the fact that the least, the most vulnerable and the least attended people in our communities have not benefited from all this growth and development? What's your take?
I think the main problem is stagnation and lack of involvement. If I can elaborate, a lot of the people that have opened businesses around STAD, outside of STAD itself, are bringing the price range of the state that they left to here in Georgia, in Savannah. They don't seem to understand that this state has a lower economy. Prices are cheaper here. A lot of things are cheaper here. But they come here with good intentions and they bring a price hike. And then they hire people that are not native of Savannah. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think you should hire some locals. On top of that, the employment market is filtering out a lot of qualified employees, especially if they converted to the internet and are using online application systems. Despite the advice of many IT and IS professionals, which I used to be, they're using software packages that are based upon similar code. And this code has a major flaw. It spits out 60% of qualified applicants. So what happens? Less people get an opportunity to interview. Less people are hired, more people either remain unemployed or remain stuck at the bottom. And this is why you notice the homeless rate never decreases.
Right.
And it just remains stagnant at the same level. I think those are the major characteristics that are leading to this problem for the last 20 years.
Chuck, I think that's the point.
It's an interesting perspective. I'd like to know from his perspective what would be 2 or 3 things that you know inherently need changing along those lines you just mentioned.
Well, number one, I think the new businesses that have owners that arrive from another state, I think they need to give locals more of an opportunity. I understand they want to help fellow students. They're living in dorms and apartments, and that's commendable, and I want them to. But every once in a while, I think they need to give some locals a chance as well. They need employment just as much as any university, college, or tech student that's from out of town. Number two, I think they need to change the hiring process, especially online. They need to start either one, having the coder write software for an online application process, which is more expensive in the short term, but it's cheaper in the long run. Or they need to find a new way of handling the online process when filtering potential applicants. They also need to not bring people in for interviews if the position's already been filled.
Yeah.
A lot of HR people will bring people in for an interview knowing the position is filled just to not have any liability issues. They need to stop that.
Right.
I think this would make a major improvement. And I think we need to offer, well, more apprenticeships. Everybody is obsessed with university, college, and tech school that we've just thrown out apprenticeships. And we're also have this, well, this perception that even in the blue collar industry, you have to go to school. No, there's apprenticeships, and we need to bring them back. They're more cost effective. They deliver better teaching when it comes to application on the job. And a lot of these blue collar sectors would not only benefit from apprenticeships, but so would the apprentice. And the job, it leads straight into employment.
Gotcha.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I want to move. I want to ask you a specific question about a couple of sets of questions, actually, about a topic you kind of alluded to there. And I want to talk to you about what's called the Savannah Economic Development Authority. Okay, this is a state chartered organization whose kind of sole mission is to attract, quote unquote, new jobs. But that always translates into new businesses, those out of town businesses that you kind of just alluded to a few minutes ago. So I want to expound on that issue with you here. Savannah Economic Development Authority, for those who don't know, is an agency that negotiates on behalf of the city, the county, the school board, and the transit system to alleviate property taxes over a certain period of time with like kind of a step up basis over that time. It's usually 5, 10, or 20 years. And you know, it'll scale up to 100% taxation. And so what we see is a lot of those deals in and around the port, in and around 95 and the airport, the former West Chatham super site. And I'm sure Bryan County is going to have something here with their new mega site coming up. So my question is for two specific areas on this board, because you guys have great influence in the delegation if you were to win this election in that charter. All right. Number one is how the board is structured itself, Clinton. There are 15 members of the board of directors. There's a rotating basis for the appointments to that board. The rotation goes like this. Out of every 3 seats, Chatham County government gets the first one. The city of Savannah gets the second one. And then the board of directors itself gets that third appointment. It doesn't seem very democratic to us. It seems to lead to the same revolving door of those types of professionals who are going to give preference or preferential treatment to kind of those out of town businesses coming in versus maybe an in-town business trying to expand, right? Could you speak to the way that board itself is sat, under its current charter?
Under its current charter, it's set for cronyism. What they need to do is reform it, and they need to have more delegates that are owners of local businesses in Savannah. Therefore, they have natural ties in the city because their businesses were derived from the city. And if they have more delegates like that on the board, you'll have less cronyism, where deals are mastered only to benefit attracting businesses from other states, but you have no incentives for the people that are here. What they need to do is when they negotiate these deals, try and negotiate a tax break if they hire a certain number of locals in Savannah when they bring their business from out of state. So not only is the business out of state getting the deal, less taxation, they get even a greater decrease in taxation by hiring some local people that are qualified for the employment positions.
Let me follow up with another question along these lines. The way that these deals get put into place is, XYZ company says they're going to create 100 jobs at $15 an hour. Now, on the backside, if you go, you even as a candidate right now to Savannah Economic Development Authority, if you go talk to them, they'll give you what they call our audited results of their deals. And you say, well, where'd you get the information from? And they'll say it was self-prepared by the client, right? Okay. So we saw a couple years back, I don't remember which company it was, John, you'll have to remind me, but a company laid off their entire workforce. That was a SEDA deal. And it turns out they laid off 80 people, and they said that they were going to create 150 jobs. So I say all that to say this, Clinton. Do you support changing the charter to require independent audits of all of these deals? And furthermore, if these deals are not being lived up to by the private sector, do you support having a clawback clause added that would maybe be able to level the incentives to what they should have been, given the lack of full deliverance of the promised jobs? Does that make sense?